Hello and welcome to Chapters, A Life in Books. I'm Hannah MacInnes. Each week I step inside an independent bookshop to meet one of the British Book Awards shortlisted authors and talk about the books that shaped them. In this episode, we're joined by Ruth Jones, best-selling author, screenwriter and much-loved co-creator of Gavin and Stacey, whose storytelling has captivated audiences on page and screen alike. Ruth, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute treat to have you on the podcast and to be talking to you in Saucy Books. One-of-a-kind location. I can't think of a better bookish backdrop to delve into your literary life. We're going to hear about the stories that shaped you and the authors that inspired you and the books that turned you into the very accomplished, best-selling British Book Awards shortlisted author that you are today. But before we go back, you're shortlisted Author of the Year, and By Your Side, in its brilliantly orange paperback form, is coming out in May. Could you just tell those people who haven't been fortunate enough to delve into its pages what it's about?
Yes. So the central character is a woman called Linda who works for the council in a sort of made-up but based on reality department, which deals with when people have died. They often, if they haven't got a next of kin, I mean, this is true, if they haven't got a next of kin and no next of kin can be found, everything that they own and leave behind them goes to the Crown. And so there is a department in Scotland which their job is to locate next of kin. And very often they might be people that have never met the deceased. They might be very distant relatives. And I read about it on the BBC website and I just thought it was a really interesting job. And I thought it would offer up quite interesting, you know, he was very full of potential in terms of story. And I wanted to create a character who was very positive, very body positive. She's a plus size woman who enjoys life to the full, enjoys her food, enjoys sex, is just a very, very positive person. She's a divorcee, she's funny, she's kind. And so it's her. The story is told from two perspectives. So it's her story where she's investigating a case, and the case is the other character, which is a man called Levi, who's a Welsh guy, and it's basically set in the 80s. And it's really about how she solves the mystery of Levi Norman. And it was inspired mainly. It started off when I read the story on the BBC website, but I also there were other influences as well, which came into it. I'd heard a story on a podcast about a woman who found out when she was like 18 that her mother was not her real mother. And it wasn't that she was adopted, it was that her mother had died tragically in a car crash when she was a baby. And she'd never been able to bond with the person that she thought was her mother, and she could never really work out why. And I thought that was also quite interesting. So I put quite a few ingredients into the story. And it's told, Linda's perspective is told very much from the first person, which was a joy for me because it was sort of like writing a monologue and I could become the character of Linda, whereas all my other books, my other three novels have been set in the third person past tense. Linda's story was very much present tense, first person, and it was a real joy for me to be able to write like that.
When you say about ingredients, are you always doing that, sort of moving around thinking of ingredients for what could turn into a new novel or a book?
Yeah, all the time, because I think reality is often funnier than fiction, you know, and I do tend to collect like a magpie, collect little things, and I write things down on my phone or put them in my notebook because I think, that would be quite good to use that at some point.
To go back then to the beginning, can you remember your first sort of book-shaped memory, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I always read as a child. My mum encouraged us all to read, and it was Enid Blyton, it was the Twins of St Clair's, it was the Mallory Towers stories, it was the Secret Seven, the Famous Five. It was a lot of Enid Blyton, and I remember the magic of reading and creating those worlds in my head and imagining what those people look like, because I do think that's the joy of books, whether they be written or audio. I suppose with audiobooks, you sort of have your perception coloured a little bit because the reader is giving you their voice. However, you still have the joy of creating the worlds and what these characters look like in your head. And it's the same with radio drama, I always think. So I remember that being quite, and also I remember the sorrow of coming to the end of a book. You know, that when you don't want to leave that world. So certainly a lot of that was my mum bought me all the Little Women, Good Wives, those Louisa May Alcott books when I was younger, and it was really then when I was doing A-level English that I started to read more of the classics. So yeah, I mean, we didn't have the distractions that young people have today. So, you know, we only had 3 channels on the TV, and you didn't have mobile phones. So, so reading was a real proper entertainment.
Would people have said of you then, talking about imagination, did you always have a vivid one?
Yeah, I did really. I used to like to pretend, and I think I went to Porthcawl Little Theatre when I was about 6, and I loved the idea of playing another part, becoming somebody else. And I think that does help a lot with writing, having become an actress. I think being able to be other people, it helps inform your writing as well, whether it be for TV scripts or for novels. So yeah, I think my imagination. I mean, my brothers used to always say, you know, that I was a drama queen. They'd still say I'm a drama queen, and I probably used to overreact. They used to cry. The family cry was always, "Mum, Ruth's overreacting." Yeah. So I can never understand why they didn't say overact.
I just was wondering if you meant that. So those sort of Enid Blyton and this sort of wonderful imaginary worlds you remember, do you have one that stands out that you remember just particularly adoring, a childhood favourite of those?
Well, I think I really did enjoy the Mallory Towers books and the St Clair's books because I think they... I suppose because it was a very different world for me, the idea of going to boarding school, because I went to the local primary school. But I do also, when I was about 9 or 10, my grandmother gave me David Copperfield to read, which is, as you know, this massive book. And I remember it having very, very thin pages. And that affected me quite profoundly because it was a very different time. It was Victorian, and the characters, and I remember the cruelty of Mr. Murdstone just really stayed with me. And I think also on TV at that time, there would be adaptations of books like you know, Dickens adaptations, and just thinking, oh my gosh, is that what people used to go to? And it was really quite affecting, actually. And then I ended up doing David Copperfield for A-level. And so I've always got a great affection for a lot of Dickens, but for David Copperfield in particular, I think because I read it at such a young age and because it was so huge, what an achievement.
That is 9 to read David. That's pretty impressive. We're talking, so those imaginary worlds, probably not the world of David Copperfield, but it might be. Which one, if you could just right now, and I think we all feel like we would love this power right now, you can escape to your imaginary literary world of choice.
Right.
Where have you gone?
Thomas Hardy. It would be Thomas Hardy world. I mean, again, just awful sadness in those tales, but there was also the way that he described the bucolic nature, you know, the bucolic settings. And, you know, if you think about Tess of the D'Urbervilles, when she was working at the dairy and she met Angel Clare, and there was just something beautiful about that, or Far From the Madding Crowd, and Return of the Native, and all of that being connected with nature. I remember, that for me, if I could just go to the nice bits of Thomas Hardy, that's where I would go.
What about which book do you remember sort of unnerving and unsettling you, which some of the ones you've already referred to definitely did?
It would probably be The Mayor of Casterbridge, because I did that for A-level as well. I mean, A-level English was a whole, that was like opening this magic door to these books that I'd not really been aware of. And of course it was work. You had to, they were set texts, but to me they were so enjoyable. So I think The Mayor of Casterbridge really pulled the rug from under me because of the way that he uses fate and talks about fate, and the way that you just go, oh no, if only. And in fact, talking about the influences in By Your Side, there's for those people who don't know The Mayor of Casterbridge, there's a very sad storyline in there where Michael Henchard, who is the Mayor of Casterbridge, who goes from being this very successful member of the community and the local mayor to then just being completely on his uppers. But his relationship with his daughter is really, really sad, because he does, sorry, spoiler alert, but he does discover that Elizabeth Jane is not his daughter, and he doesn't have the courage to tell her because he loves her so much. And in fact, if he had told her the truth, they probably could have had a really good relationship. But he chooses to keep that to himself, and that influenced a particular storyline in By Your Side for me.
Was there a particular book other than that one that influenced you? So you said lots of the ingredients for By Your Side, but was there any particular book that would have influenced that?
I don't think so. I think the Mayor of Casterbridge, that particular storyline in The Mayor of Casterbridge did. But no, I don't think there was sometimes I find it not healthy to read when I'm writing, if you sort of mean, especially if the stories are connected, because there has been, and I can't think of examples, but there have been times when I've been writing when I have also been reading and gone, oh no, they're going to think I've copied this. And of course, there is a certain number of ideas in the world, isn't there? So, so sometimes I'm not sure it's a good idea to read when you're writing.
But what about more generally, whether there was an author or a story or something that was the moment you thought, oh, I want to do that, I could do that, that's for me, that writing thing?
Well, it's funny because I'd fallen into novel writing quite accidentally. When I was filming Fat Friends, we did a series, and then there was quite a long period of unemployment for me. And I'd been very influenced by Kay Mellor, who created Fat Friends and loads of other great dramas, and she's a great loss to the TV writing world. And she was very encouraging of new writers, and she encouraged people that wanted to write. She would look at what you'd done and give you feedback and all that kind of thing. And I started writing a TV script during that period, and it was terrible. It was awful. And then she gave me feedback, and then I got an idea to write something else. So I wrote this 3-part TV drama about a woman who has an affair when she's younger, goes horribly wrong, and then years later she meets the guy that she had the affair with. And I wrote this 4-parter. Nothing came of it. And then years later, like it was about 15 years later, I found the script and I read it again, and I thought, oh, it's terrible, not a great script, the dialogue's terrible, but it's a good story. And so as a labour of love, I started adapting it for prose fiction. And there was, I hadn't talked to anybody about doing it. I just wanted to see if I could do it. That's kind of where the journey started for me with novel writing. And I I wrote about 10,000 words, and then I sent it to a friend who worked in publishing, and it kind of went from there. And I can't remember what order this happened in, but I was doing a comic relief sketch with Dawn French, and she had just written her first novel. Her first novel had been out for a while, and she said to me, "You could write a novel." And I was like, "Oh, no, I couldn't. And she was like, "No, seriously, you could." And I always remember that, because I think sometimes it's good in life, you know, when you make these decisions about yourself, you go, "No, I couldn't possibly do that." And I think, well, I could, and I did, and I'm really grateful that she was that encouraging, you know. So yeah, it was a mixture of things that happened, really.
Yeah, and a mixture of two great, Kay and Dawn.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Great influences. So if we're back into the sort of hypothetical, you've escaped to your literary land. I'm afraid we've brought you back from Hardy's bucolic landscape. But now a friend of yours comes to you, and for some reason they've never had the opportunity to read a book. Perhaps they live in this awful place where books are banned, and they come to you and say, "Now I can read my first book. What shall I read?"
Well, I was thinking about this, and I thought, do you choose something that is current, because then it's easier to understand the references, or do you choose more of a classic? And I have to say, I mean, it's very, very predictable, but I would suggest Pride and Prejudice, because although it's set in the 18th century, so obviously the references are different, the way people lived are different, it comes down to basic human condition. And I think when I first read Pride and Prejudice, initially I was like, "Oh, what's this about?" I wasn't quite, I thought it was going to be a little bit frothy and frilly. And then really quite early on into the book, I just thought, oh my goodness, this is such incredible observation of human behaviour and human psychology. So I think perhaps, and also it's very funny, the humour is brilliant, it's a love story, it's a social comment, because it's talking about how life was, especially for women back then. So yeah, predictable, but I don't think you can go wrong with Pride and Prejudice.
I mean, I've kind of got it all.
Yeah.
And I mean, do you remember where it was when you first read it, Pride and Prejudice?
Where I was.
When was that?
That would have been, I think I was very late to Jane Austen, actually, because I was always I was a Hardy fan and I was a Bronte fan. And I think it was something like, 2005 that I first read Pride and Prejudice. Okay. Very, very late, because it wasn't one of our set texts, which obviously is in a lot of schools. And yeah, I remember I was on holiday actually when I read it, and I was like, this is fabulous.
So we have to ask you then, when the opportunity to play the Mrs. Bennet came up, I mean, what did you just jump at that?
Absolutely, I leapt in the air. I mean, obviously, there've been so many great Mrs. Bennets in film and TV. She's a wonderful character, but because this was not, you're referring to the other Bennet sister, the Janice Hadlow wrote the novel, and then it was adapted by Sarah Quintrell. And for people who don't know, it's whereas in Pride and Prejudice it's mainly about Lizzie and her love story with Darcy. In the other Bennet sister, it focuses on the middle daughter in the Bennet family, Mary, who's always been historically considered to be a very boring, bookish person, who won't fit in with society's norms and doesn't want to get married. And when I read it, I just thought, you know, you hear that expression, don't you? You can come from a family of several siblings, and you're all brought up by the same parents, but generally speaking, but you will have a different relationship with your parents. I mean, I'm one of four, and I know for a fact all four of us have got different relationships with our parents. And so this looked at Mrs. Bennet's relationship with her middle daughter, who she just found incredibly frustrating. And rather than being kind, the way I looked at it, the part was that she was like an 18th century estate agent who had 5 properties to sell, one of which would not shift, regardless of however much she tried to reduce the price. But there's also a sort of a way where she does explain why she had to be like she is, which comes down to the whole way that society was structured back then, that if, as a woman, if you didn't marry a rich man, then you were, out on your ear. And it doesn't excuse my Mrs. Bennet's cruel behaviour, but it sort of explains it.
So did you naturally find that empathy, or do you sort of seek to do that to play the character to your best ability, to find some empathy with where she's going?
Well, I think it just is a sign of really good writing, actually. It comes down to the writing. And I think that had they not, had Janice Hadlow not explored the reasons why Mrs. Bennet behaved the way she did, and then that subsequently, if that was not reflected in the adaptation, I think she would just become a cartoon character and very two-dimensional. So I really like the fact that you do discover why she's like she is.
I mean, I could talk about her and your brilliant portrayal of her all day, but I'm going to move back to some of these questions about the books that shaped you. But it might be the same answer. I don't know. If you had the opportunity to go and have a coffee, it could be a glass of wine. I think we should be more broad about what drink you can have with this author. Alive or dead, who would you choose?
Oh, my goodness.
Would it be Jane?
I'd kind of like to sit down with all the Bronte sisters, because I think they were quite fascinating, and there have been some fabulous imagined life stories of the Bronte sisters. 15 Wild Summers that looks at Emily Bronte, for example. And I just think that living up there in that cold Yorkshire, bleak landscape, I'd just be fascinated to just find out how they tick. And also, these 3 women, I know Charlotte married in the end, but to have this powerhouse of imagination going on in their heads when they lived in this parsonage and these very, very restricted lives. So I'd love to be able to ask some really intimate questions and sit down and ask them. I went with one of my close friends who's also a Bronte fan. We went up a couple of years ago in January up to Haworth, and we were very fortunate. They opened the parsonage up for us to have a look round, and there's a table there with E.B. sort of carved into the wood, and it was so visceral because you could just feel where they lived, and just to be able to go there into the parsonage, they probably wouldn't have a glass of wine.
I was just thinking, what would you be drinking?
It'd probably be very weak tea, I should think. Yeah, and we'd be very, very cold.
But you are going to have more than one, but we'll let you. I feel like now I'm definitely doing you can have it, it's fine. You can have all 3. I feel like maybe lots of these questions help us in slightly troubled times to imagine. I mean, you said books do that almost better than anything else, help us to escape. And, you've had your imaginary land. But what about a book that you feel helps just as a balm and a sort of a salve in difficult times, just a comfort book? Maybe that you, in your own, or that you would recommend to others?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it is a balm really, but I really love the Cazalet Chronicles, which of course is more than one book. Am I allowed more than one book? No, because I've already had the Bronte sisters.
You've had all the sisters. You can have Chronicles. I think Chronicles is fine. And there's a lot of strife we need to be dealing with. So
yeah, I think sometimes also historical novels are quite comforting. Because you sort of know what the outcome's going to be, so there's a sort of a safety in that. I love Jojo Moyes. I love her writing. I love Isabel Allende, and again, it's quite there's a lot of cruelty in it, but I think House of Spirits is one of my all-time favourites. Oh, you'll send me off when I'm trying to think. Right, no, I tell you which one I would choose. I would choose Kate Atkinson, Behind the Scenes at the Museum. That would be my balm, because I think it's a brilliant story. I think it's very funny, and it has got for me one of the most shocking moments in a book that I've ever read, and it made me, when I read it, I went, and I don't want to give a spoiler alert for people who haven't read it, so you'll have to read it to find out where it is.
It made you gasp out loud.
Yeah.
Another sort of similarly difficult, I think, question for anyone to answer, but really interesting. Another thing that books do so powerfully is help you see things from a different perspective, or change your mind in ways that, I don't know, politicians can't do perhaps so well. Is there a book that you remember reading and thinking, when you'd read it, you went away feeling differently about the world or about something or someone?
I remember reading Shantaram by Gregory David Roberts, which it's set in, a lot of it is set in India in the 1980s. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And a lot of it is set in Mumbai. And I did go and visit Mumbai years later, and the Leopold Cafe, where a lot of the book is set. But that was an eye-opener because I had no idea of the way that people lived. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we are so privileged, you know. But a book that stayed with me in very recent times, which again was very educational, I suppose, but it was so much more than that, is Alif Shafak's Island of the Missing Trees. Because I had a very good friend at uni who was a Greek Cypriot, London Greek Cypriot, and he used to talk to me about what had happened in Cyprus in 1974, it was not something I was really aware of. And that book is such a beautifully written novel, which is essentially a love story between a Turkish Cypriot girl and a Greek Cypriot boy, and when the country divides, how that affects their relationship. And the fact that the story is told from the perspective of a fig tree growing through a cafe that gets transported over to London, I thought that's what books do so brilliantly, is that they can have a talking tree. And so that's always affected me, that book. I mean, it's quite a recent one, but I do always recommend that to people because I think it has everything in it.
I'm really glad you said that also, because I think one of Alif Shafak's brilliances, one of the things she's so good at, is exactly that gentle, not changing of minds, but helping people to see things in a different way. And
Yes.
I think that's also one of the things that drives everything she does, the hope that the world could be changed by her writing. So I think that's a very good one. We'll allow you that.
Thank you.
It could be Alif Shafak, but I think your power now is to be able to give an award, a British Book Award, to any author for any book. Would you be able to do that?
Oh, gosh. That's really hard. That's really hard. Because, I mean, there's just so many. I mean, I love Rachel Joyce. I just saw the stage version of the Unlikely Pilgrimage, which was amazing. I think she's got a particular way of tapping into sadness and sorrow, but making it, I was going to say, it doesn't depress you. It does really touch you, but there's a softness and a warmth to her writing as well that makes you feel that there's a hope there, you know. So yeah, I'd give it to Rachel Joyce.
You can give her Author of the Year.
Yes.
In a separate category from the one that you're in. And you said you don't read while you're novel writing or while you're sort of scheming and collecting your novel ingredients, but are you currently reading something?
Well, I must make a confession here. For various reasons, at the moment, my life is really upside down, and I've got many, many things going on both personally and professionally. And my reading has taken a hit, and that makes me very sad, because I have really been a very voracious reader, and in recent times, I'm going, what's happened to me? Because I do find reading a book at night just makes me sleep better. It gives me a sense of calm, a sense of peacefulness. And I'm really feeling that there's a time in the very, very near future where I can start having my pile of books next to me. But I have, I've just read, the most recent book I read actually was Margaret Kennedy, The Feast. Do you know that book? My sister gave me as a Christmas present, which I thought was a really great present, actually, like a subscription to this. You fill out this form and you say what you like in books, and then they send you. She got me a 3-month subscription, and they'll send you a book a month that they think
recommendation.
Which was great, because you don't know what you're going to get. And it was written in 1950, and it's set in post-war down in Cornwall. It's a really good sort of concept about this hotel, which starts off that you know that the cliff has fallen down upon this hotel, and you don't know whether anyone survived, or if anyone survived. I mean, it sounds quite dark, but actually it's very, very funny in lots of places. And so then it goes back in time to before this natural disaster happened. And so I've just been reading that, and I've just started My Brilliant Friend with
Ellen
Ferranti. Yes, I've just started that. So I'm hoping she will bring me back into my lovely reading habit.
It's hard, though, because lots of people find that when you're going through whatever you're going through, and reading is the medicine you need, and yet it's also very, very difficult to not be distracted if your mind is elsewhere to get in.
Exactly. And I think, like I was saying about reading as a child, where there weren't those distractions, now there are so many distractions, and I'm guilty as anybody for looking at stuff on my phone. And that's what I need to replace with reading again, because I know it's good for my soul. I know that books are what I need. They nurture me, and I'm really looking forward to getting back into it again. I really am.
I feel like we can't end on a better place than books are good for my soul and they nurture me. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.